Innocence, the most fleeting and worthless of virtues. Hello and welcome back to my channel. Today I would like to talk about the First Law trilogy by Joe Abercrombie. The trilogy is composed of 3 books: The Blade Itself, Before They Hanged, and The Last Argument of Kings. However, it's one big story arc, so I'm going to review this as a whole rather than as 3 individual books. This is one of the darlings of the booktube community, so chances are if you're watching this, you've probably either already read the trilogy or at least watched another 10 reviews of it from other booktubers. We follow a cast of characters, the 3 main characters being Glokta, Logan and Jezal. And this is all told in multiple POV perspectives, so we follow the thoughts of different characters at different points in times. And Joe Abercrombie uses this to great effect, while we often jump from one character to another during a scene, for instance. The world building is very interesting and pretty broad in scope. Abercrombie takes us to different cities, different regions of the circle of the world, and we follow these characters in these different settings, and the execution is always very, very solid. The different regions of the world are very well defined. We can see how the north is very different from the west or the south, and we get some glimpses to the history and the background of why things are set up the way they are. However, compared to other book series, the world never takes center stage. The world building, while very interesting, very compelling, is still relatively limited and it's never center stage, as opposed to other book series where the world is developed to a much larger extent. The first clue you have about that is that there is no map. When you pick up the book, there is no map. So you can Google it and you can find one. But again, that is the message that you get just from picking up the book, is that if world building is massively your must-have, this might not necessarily be the series for you. When it comes to the plot, while there's plenty of action in the trilogy, I would definitely say that the pace of the story is definitely on the slower side, especially in book 1, even though that's highly subjective. For instance, personally, I didn't really find it slow, but I'm also used to reading a lot of books that are on the slower side. But if you like your books to be really fast-paced and with lots of action all the time, this is not quite that sort of book. However, things pick up, especially in book 2 and book 3. But to start with, it might feel a bit aimless, like it's not necessarily clear where the story is going. But a lot of the elements are quite traditional in terms of the fantasy tropes you can find in the trilogy. You have the quest, you have the threat of the evil lord threatening the world, etc., etc. So a lot of these are fairly standard for fantasy. However, what Abercrombie is doing really well is to really give it a very different twist to a lot of these tropes, and that is, I think, very well executed as well. Something I would like to dispute, though, is that this is often described as the darkest of grimdark, very glum series, and I sort of disagree with that. I have to premise that my taste is quite often for very dark books in tone, so maybe, I'm a bit biased in that perspective. However, the overall tone of the series never came across as particularly dark to me. Obviously, there are a lot of things happening that are not particularly happy or, cheerful, and the characters that we'll follow, as we'll see, they're not necessarily the best of people. But that said, the tone of the story is not necessarily that dark. It's always kept very upbeat, and there's a lot of very funny moments. There's a lot of humor that Abercrombie injects into the story. And yes, it's dark humor to some extent, but I never felt, oh, this is so glum and this is so difficult to get through because it's so dark. It's actually, in my opinion, it's fairly upbeat. So if the world and the plot are never center stage in the trilogy, it's because the characters are. This is heavily character driven. Heavily, when I say heavily, I mean heavily. All the characters feel very distinct and very consistent in their choices. We never have a cliche or a character. They're always very well developed and very, very believable. You really feel like they're real people almost, and you really get attached to them. You've probably heard that this is all about grey, morally grey characters. I think that's just wrong though, because I don't think any of these characters are really grey. Most of them are just downright evil. There's no grey about them. It's just that they happen to be likable. And I think this is testament to Abercrombie's great skill when it comes to character development. The fact that you can follow these downright evil characters, but still root for them. You know, it's not like in real life we might go, oh, you know, Hitler, yeah, he might have done some, you know, debatable things, but, you know, he was so witty, so funny, and he was great with puppies. And yet when it comes to the first Lord trilogy, if you ask most people who've read it, they talk about their characters in those terms pretty much. And the only character that is not downright evil, I would argue, he's the one that everybody hates because he's not very likable. He's a bit arrogant and a bit vain, I suppose. And everybody hates him, even though he's probably the only character who's not evil. So all of this just testament to Abercrombie's amazing character development skills. The fact that your moral compass is just flipped on its head and you end up rooting for these characters doing pretty despicable things. You know, it's pretty much amazing. When it comes to prose, Abercrombie's writing is, in my opinion, absolutely magnificent. It's never particularly flowery or overindulgent, but at the same time, it's always very deliberate and to the point. And it changes to adapt to the scene and the character, which I think is very, very difficult skill to have for an author and to execute in that magnificent manner. Something I really enjoyed about the trilogy is the way Abercrombie explores certain deeper themes during the story. For instance, I think Abercrombie does a really good job in describing war and the cost and consequences of war. Quite often in fantasy, war is somewhat glorified, or at least seen as a collection of heroic actions and battles where good typically prevails over evil. But in First Law, it's definitely not like that. And Abercrombie does a great job in showing how egos and the quest for power by individuals walks over the lives of a lot of soldiers and civilians who pay the consequences of war. And I think that's a very admirable theme to explore in a book. Another theme that is very interesting is that of loss and rebirth. How some of the characters that we follow, either during the story in the books, as well as in their past, they might experience deep loss in terms of what they are or what they perceive themselves to be, or things they deeply care for, and how they can take very different paths to react to this loss. And that's a very interesting depiction in the books. And lastly, one of the themes that is very well developed in the trilogy is that of leadership. Abercrombie manages to show how blindly following the leaders that we trust can often lead to pretty catastrophic consequences. We see characters deciding to choose a leader and follow them, trusting that they have the best interest at heart, or that they fully embrace the cause that they say they are pursuing, or sometimes not even questioning really their judgment and their goals. And you can see how that can lead to very questionable outcomes. And I feel Abercrombie is looking at that specific issue from a very interesting perspective. The First Law trilogy is a very solid contribution to the grimdark genre, and it has unique characters that will stay with you even after you've finished reading the story, and a very interesting plot and world building. I also very much enjoyed the ending, so my overall rating for this trilogy as a whole is 8 out of 10. If you like this video, please like and subscribe, and I'll see you the next time.